My name is Ivan Pollard. This is the way that I like to dream. Now, this is what I dream like, this is what I actually live like. And I'm afraid the latter is more likely to be your experience for me today. Now, I was called Ivan after Ivan the Terrible, and then they put Pollard after Ivan. And as Rob said, I do some stuff in marketing at the Coca-Cola company in North America, a job which I'm incredibly humbled and honoured to be able to do. A couple of interesting facts about me, for those of you who haven't read my bio. I can indeed ride a unicycle, I can juggle, and in the early days of Microsoft Word, spell check would always recorrect my name to Vane Polaroid. Which is oddly worrying for me, but it's surprisingly memorable to you, as I'm going to go on to show. But that's enough about me. I want to talk about you. I suspect each and every one of you over the last 15 years has not had a week go by when somebody hasn't told you that digital is changing everything, and that marketing as we knew it is dead. Now, we as marketers have been living with that promise for all that time, as Rob said, more effective and more efficient ways of connecting with people and having those consumers change their behaviour and their beliefs at the touch of a button. And all of that is great, but with that promise comes some problems, and with that magic comes a bit of mythology, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. All the stuff that Ian talked about, big data and little chips and machine learning and artificial intelligence and alternative realities, from alternative facts to alternative news to alternative experiences that you can see outside with Samsung. All of those things are awesome, and they're fundamentally going to change what it is that we do. But I think it's not true to say that everything changes and that digital is changing everything. It's really not. Things have stayed the same, but the way we do things is changing exponentially. For example, digital has not managed to change my underpants for me. They're the same slinky, silky, body-hugging boy baskets that they were back in 1972. However, digital has changed the way that I choose my pants, the way that I buy them, the way I pay for them, the way I store them, and very occasionally even the way I wash them. Now, the same is true of marketing. What we do is the same as it ever was, but the way we do it can be so much faster, smarter, better, and cheaper. And that's the promise of digital. But that doesn't mean that we have to be better at digital. What it means is that we have to be brilliant and stay brilliant at our core competency as marketers, which we've got to be brilliant at marketing, but accept that we're doing it in a totally digitized world. And that all the tools and the opportunities that we've got at our disposal should be leveraged with the same intent that we used to use the traditional things that Raj started talking about at the end of his speech. But I guess we have to ask ourselves why we do it. If the business we're staying in is the same as it ever was, it's kind of like what David Ogilvy said back in the 1960s, that great advertising presents the most persuasive selling message to the largest number of the right people at the right time at the lowest possible cost. And when we got it right, it kind of looked a little bit like this.
I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves. I'd like to teach the world to sing. Sing with me. Perfect harmony, perfect harmony. I'd like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company. And the real I'd like to teach the world to sing. In perfect harmony, perfectly. And I'd like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company. It's the real thing.
Now, stick your hands up if you're under the age of 30. Yeah, we've got a few people. Yeah, well, only 3. That when those dating apps start firing up, you're on the end of them. And now, keep your hand up. Anybody not seen that ad before? right? A few, good. A few under 30s, that's good. That's proof of a modern world. Now, this is the classical system. This is how classical mechanics used to work. So Ian was a physicist. I'm glad he's left because he's going to call bullshit on everything I'm about to say because I don't know what I'm talking about. But this is classical mechanics. We were really good at making those big things like Hilltop, and it helped us maintain a competitive advantage that helped us succeed. But importantly, it did so at a cost that allowed our businesses to thrive. But the truth is we've shifted from a classical era to a quantum era, and that's what Ian was talking about. So what's different from the time of Newton and Ogilvy to the time of Einstein and the iPhone? Well, the truth is the fundamental precepts remain the same, and Ogilvy's quote about more persuasive content delivered through cheaper connections is still what we are in the business of doing. Even the mechanisms by which we do it are the same. We create something, we produce it, we distribute it, we learn from it, and then we iterate on our marketing. But as Ian was talking about, digital has got the capability now to place quantums of data right at the heart of the machine that does this for us, and then put machines in the place of all of us people and do everything in milliseconds. And it's doing it in a world that looks like this. You've all seen these charts thousands of times. I don't expect you to be able to read them, but this is all about how much time we're spending in front of how many different screens. But here's an interesting fact, and one that you won't pay any attention to whatsoever. According to Google, quoting some statistics from the National Center for Biotechnology Information, the average human attention span in the year 2000 was 12 seconds. Anybody want to guess what it is today? 3. Are you paying attention? Because you answered the question. Some answered the question, the rest of you not paying attention, I think. So 3, any advance on 3? 5, 2, 6, 8, 1. It's actually apparently 8.25 seconds. So all of our advertising that we're doing our advertising in an ADD world, right? It's not, so we've put another D in advertising, but it's not an attention deficit disorder. I think it's just the order of the way things are today. So we're spending more time consuming way more stuff in way more places, but we're paying a little bit less attention to everything we see. But I'm starting to wonder whether our focus on attention is actually misplaced, because maybe what's happening is the way our brains work is changing. With all of this technology and all of these devices, maybe we're rewiring our brains, and so that time spent is not actually the appropriate metric to work out how attention affects comprehension. Let me go into that a little bit. Here's a good old-fashioned magazine. Admittedly, I read it on my iPad. No, I didn't. I bought this in the airport. This is this month's Scientific American. And it's a super interesting article. You see the front cover about Alzheimer's. A stunning statistic. 32% of Americans that make it to the age of 85 are going to go on to suffer Alzheimer's or dementia. Over the last 30 years, over 200 drug trials have tried to tackle this problem, but none of them have proved very successful. But recently, a group of Finnish researchers and scientists took a different approach. They did what they call a randomized control study. Really, you should read the article, go get the magazine and buy the magazine, and that's why they allow me to put their cover up here in a presentation. Go buy it, read this, because I think it's really important for where the world's going. What they did was they took a group of aging people, and over a period of 2 years, all of these people had the same predisposition for dementia. Over a period of 2 years, half of that group in the blue bar just got regular medical advice and updates. The other half, in the other 4 bars, they got nutrition, exercise, brain games, and social programs that they had to follow. And again, apologies, you might not be able to see it at the back of the room, but over just a 2-year period, there was a statistical significant change in memory function, in executive function of the brain, and importantly, in processing speed. So which group of people do we know that exercise more, eat better, play games more, and socialize more than perhaps generations previously? It's young people, Gen Z, millennials. So here's a proposition. Maybe the decline in their attention isn't what we should be thinking about, because perhaps, just as with these old people, those behaviors of socializing and gaming, for instance, those behaviors might be speeding up the processing power of their brain. And that's a really interesting thought, because You know, digital in that context, the idea that we can put the right stuff in front of right people for less time and still get a result for our business is the promise of what digital was. Here's another thing from 2006, from when I used to work at a company called Naked. This is what we thought the promise of digital was 11 years ago. It was going to give us actionable, addressable, affordable, accountable ways of engaging human beings and a whole host of other things beginning with an A. And this was supposed to show up like a big-ass beast with a giant A tattooed on its chest and cause an extinction event for things like magazines and television. But instead of the Tyrannosaurus, we got a chipmunk with a sweater on it. Now, admittedly, we got millions and millions of these chipmunks. Raj showed you one of those chipmunks earlier today, and I'm going to come back and compare what he showed you with Usher to what I just showed you with Hilltop. Those chipmunks are running around millions of times, doing their things, and that's the day that we live in today. Little micro-segmented, targeted things, but what I want to know is, do they add up to something big? And are they worth the cost that we are paying for them? And there's an interesting thing about the cost, because the cost is unclear in this digital world. You know, the accountability is not there, and honestly, in FMCG, for the businesses that we work in, I'm going to show you that the case is still unproven about the ability to build brands in the long term. So there is a little bit of the promise of digital being undermined to a degree by this lack of trust that's out there. I'm not going to get into digital supply chain and transparency and bots and blocking and all that sort of stuff. Somebody else is going to talk about that a little bit later. But here is an interesting little piece of analysis. If you have a look at the big four holding companies' agency reports over the last 6-7 years and you dig into them, you can find an interesting correlation. This is the rise in their total ad spend, this is the rise year on year in their digital ad spend, and this is the rise in their company profits. So you can see right over on the far right-hand side of the chart, as programmatic really starts to get scale, profits are going up, and that does cause us to raise an eyebrow. Now, I've been agency side, I've been client side. I've got no problem with agencies making money at all. I think that's what they're there for, and I think they're wonderful, fully functioning partners as business partners when they're open, honest, and transparent. So I'll leave that there and get back to Coca-Cola. Now, at Coke, we can see that promise of digital, and obviously, even though it's got a little tarnish on it with some of these issues at the moment, what I think we want to know is, whilst it can be very good at targeting people, can it give us prominence, presence, and scale? Because we're a scaled business. Every day, we sell hundreds of millions of drinks to tens of millions of consumers in North America. So in that context, in the world of personalized content and digital devices, we have to maintain a real healthy balance between being woven into the fabric of life in America and yet still having a presence in the places of digital. Now, the big thing that digital was promising when I put that chart up in 2006 was the idea that we can get just the right thing in front of just the right people at exactly the right time in precisely the right location. But importantly, that when we add it all up, all those little chipmunks will add up to something of scale that's appropriate for our business. Now, I'm starting to wonder whether that's true and whether or not it is possible to generate scale in the digital world for fast-moving consumer goods. And I'll show you why I think that's slightly problematic. Now, I think that trying to target beyond the kind of precision of your own products is perhaps a waste of time and a waste of money and a waste of effort. We've grown up, those of us who have been marketing or agency side for a long time, grew up in a world where I think we've been hoodwinked into believing the concept of wastage and the validity of targeting. And that was all propagated by the mechanics of the markets of TV and of print. And I think the honest truth is that people who are outside of our desired audience, you know, we've been told that they were worthless, but they weren't. They're just worth less. So sure, we could target 100 teenagers on TV, for instance, and pay a premium for getting it. But whilst we got those 100 teenagers, we also got a whole host of short, old, ugly Englishmen, and you got them for free. Now, those Englishmen still think they're teenagers and still want to buy a Coca-Cola and drink it as often as I do, which I do. Advertising break, kind of worked. I think you'd agree, Coke, some of the things that they say it does to you perhaps are exaggerated. Definitely keeps you short, though, so be careful. PAC team, have I just caused a problem? I've got people down there. Anyway, so the idea that people are kind of they're worth less and we should be able to target them. Now, you don't get that when you address people digitally. You get just what you pay for, and that's great. You pay a premium for that precision, and that's wonderful if, as Ian said, you're selling a $100,000 sports car, or as Raj said, you're trying to convert somebody to your credit card that's going to last them a life. But for us that are trying to sell that irresistible, lovely beverage to hundreds of millions of people every day, I don't think the economics are working right now. And that's because each of those transactions is taking place in pennies on the pound, not in tens of millions of dollars. So let me show you why I say this. It's all about the economics of CPG. At Coke, we're lucky to have a huge team that can measure everything, and to the extent that, that they're able to see the math and get the data, they can attribute the effect of everything back to our brands and our business. This is a cleverly blurred out slide, because apparently I'm not allowed to show you the real data, but underneath all of this measurement, what this is telling us is that weight of advertising works, and Byron Sharp is right about reach. It's also telling us quality of content is key, and Ogilvy's still right about great advertising. But what it's also telling us is that the costs are not working in our favor. We can't get digital to work hard enough in the economics of a consumer packaged goods. And this is kind of crazy because, you know, we all talk about how television's declining and it's on its way to some sort of dusty death. But in fact, the economics are just not viable at the moment for us in digital. I'm not saying digital doesn't work. It does for things that are really important to target, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm saying in the economics of CPG, you know, we can't get to just the right people at just the right time or at just the right price to be able to make the money turn for us. Now, maybe it's the way we're using it. Maybe it's some of the limitations of our business model with you know, limited e-commerce. But maybe it's because the real world really does still work better for us. And I'm going to show you. So, digital, the pricing, even with all of the hidden costs and the variable costs and the fixed costs, we still can't get it to work for why it is that we want to. And here is what I think is going on. Imagine that we want to reach, let's say, 2,000 shoppers walking into a big store in downtown Toronto, don't say the T, Toronto, this weekend. You know, our natural inclination these days is to find out who they are, pay to acquire their data, study their behavior, get Screen to do all sorts of analysis about how many ribeye steaks they've eaten. Then we create personalized content. We pay again to serve that content to them on a mobile phone right at the moment that they're walking into that store and make them an irresistible offer. Meanwhile, we're completely ignoring that good old-fashioned billboard that was standing right next to that store, reaching all of those people every time they walked in the store and did it at much less cost. Now, this is what I mean about getting back to the real world. I think there is also kind of a hidden danger lurking in this idea of getting everything to be digital. Because I think we're in danger of disappearing into what I think I'd call a digital void. Everything we talk about is served one-on-one, just me and my device, and as a result, there's no collective experience. How many people had already seen the Usher thing for Priceless? Right? And they proved that that was economically reasonable. Now stick your hand up if you've seen I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing before. Okay? That's the problem that we as marketers have got to tackle. Each individual chipmunk is great, but we've got to be able to get these chipmunks to add up. Now, what I mean inside of all of this is, in a prosaic term, we'd rather buy a social post than we would a signpost, right? We'd rather buy something that reaches people on a precise, momentary, fleeting, kind of personalized kind of basis, rather than buy something that's long-lasting, right, universal, and reaches everybody. And right now, what would you buy if you were me and they both cost the same? And remember, they're not costing the same. One's costing us a lot more. So that's the thing that we are having to deal with, and let me just tell you how we're going to try and get our balance back between the real world, the digital world, and making sure we stay woven in both economically. This is what it looked like in the 1950s. Coke was so big, it was able to be everywhere all the time. But nowadays, there are more places to be, especially in the ever-expanding and infinite digital universe, and more people want to be there. So we can't be everywhere all the time, so as a result, we have to try and maintain a seeming partial presence. So there are some places we want to be there all the time, an NHRA race for Mellow Yellow or college basketball sidelines for Powerade. And there are some times we want to be everywhere, Fanta and Halloween, or Christmas and Coca-Cola. Now, how do we manage that in the digital world? And this is kind of where I think we're going. Where do we need to go? So how do we manage that balance between ubiquity and presence? And here's our simple rule. We want to be in the conversations that matter to our brands and on the platforms that matter to our consumers, but we have to be there especially at the moments that matter to our business. And at the moment, we spend too much time stuck in that dubious middle. So what I want to talk about is how we go, one, for the delightful masses, how we get scale in digital, but the second is what I call decisive moments. Now, I think Google are right when they talk about moments in marketing, but I think I'd push them further. And, you know, obviously not all moments are created equal, especially for those of us who are selling high-volume, low-cost goods. What we're looking for is what we call a decisive moment. Now, those of you who are into photography might remember a guy called Henri Cartier-Bresson, who was a famous French photographer. And this was his approach to taking a great picture. He'd wait for what he'd call the decisive moment, and he'd snap. A moment too soon, and he'd miss it. A moment too late, and he'd miss it, and the magic would disappear. But when he got it right, you had small children and the circle of life with the hearse passing in the background. So decisive moment, great. He believed that it was a decisive moment for everything in life, including for Coca-Cola. Now, you might think that a decisive moment for us is a group of thirsty young boys and girls walking out of their spin class at SoulCycle, or a bunch of aging hipster millennials walking out of their tech startup with no socks on looking for their lunch. And both of those are good moments for us. But I don't know whether they're what we call decisive moments. Occasionally, I think it's worth paying for them, almost by chance. But a decisive moment for us is much more likely to be the moment you first fill in your online shopping list on an e-commerce grocery site that's going to deliver week in and week out your food and drink order. Because once I'm on there, that's going to return huge future value for us, and that's what I call a decisive moment. That's one for which I would pay a premium, and to which I'd invite a French photographer. Now, what about the other end of the spectrum? Those moments don't happen all that often, so they're worth paying a premium for. So what about the other end of the spectrum? Where would our approach be to trying to reach the delightful masses and try and capture some of that aggregated scale of digital? And here's a radical thought, which is for all of the programmatic and all of the algorithms and all the machine learning and that sort of stuff, what if our algorithm was just buy everything? Yeah, within reason, you know, let's stay away from the things that are bad, but just buy everything so long as it's very, very cheap. And let's just leave context up to timing and chance. So we could do this. This could be something, a strategy we pursue. Let's pay more for what we really think in a fast-moving consumer goods market is a decisive moment, and let's pay much less for just aggregating the stuff. Go back to reach and frequency, get back to that game, and see how that works. And if you were really wise looking at some of those bars from 2015 to 2016 on the ROI, you can see we're starting to adopt this strategy. We led first with Facebook, and now we're looking at other digital platforms. And I think this is possible. But we have to maintain that balance, the balance between, you know, what is happening in the real world and what is happening in the digital world, and pay appropriately for both of them. So here are the three things that we're doing. First of all, we're reconsidering how we maintain ubiquity and presence in both the real world and the digital world. Secondly, we're doing this with a fanatical focus on the I in ROI. Because if you don't understand that, where the investment's going, how on earth are you going to understand how the R is coming back? And thirdly, we're starting to challenge the very means and models by which we spend our money. And if we get this right, then I think we will maintain a visible presence in the real world, but obtain the promise of what digital was giving us. So here's an instantly forgettable summary, because you'll only pay attention for 8 seconds, of the last 25 minutes of your life, to which, according to Google, you paid no attention anyway. So listen, we as marketers, we're living in a complicated world, but the job of marketing remains fundamentally the same. We're living in an era where we can invent brilliant, simpler, better ways of doing the same thing that we always did, but returning greater value both to the human beings at the far end of our spectrum and the companies who are paying our bills. And this is a great time to be doing this, and we're all lucky to be asked to get it done. But let's not forget that what we do is also supposed to be fun, and we should keep enjoying it despite all of the stuff that's around. They're good questions to ask, and they're fun to answer. So the digital world is amazing. What we can do is remarkable, right? The real world should not be forgotten. And the future, very quickly, is going to meld the two, as you're going to see with virtual reality. And when that happens, what we can do is going to be remarkable. But only if we keep working openly and honestly and together can we make the remarkable, markedly make our marketing smarter. Now you try repeating that at the end of 20 minutes. Make the remarkable, make our marketing markedly smarter. It's good. So thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to having a few questions from Rob and any other questions for you. But what I want to do first, just to check on whether anybody was paying attention, anybody remember what my spell check name was? Thank you very much. And doesn't it fit? Rob?